which I will introduce, Dr. Toni Lyn Morelli. Toni Lyn is a research ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. She has a PhD from Stony Brook University and is an expert in translational invasion ecology. She's a founding member of the RISCC Management Network, as well as an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Conservation at the University of Massachusetts. Her research uses lab, field, and modeling techniques to facilitate natural resource management and habitat and species conservation in the face of climate change. So please welcome Dr. Toni Lyn. And we'll share the screen or share your screen.
Thanks, happy to be here. I can't share my screen yet, but I'm sure that's about to change.
And we'll make you a co-host.
I'm gonna try now.
All right.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, thanks. Sorry about eating into your break. If you go to the bathroom, just make sure to turn your microphone and video off. So yes, I'm very happy to be here. I USGS research ecologist at the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, which Long Island and New York are a part of. And we have a lot of information that hopefully is useful to you. So I'll put our website up at some point. I want to talk to you about translational invasion ecology, which probably doesn't mean anything to you. Those three words don't mean much to you probably, but I think it's actually what you're probably already doing. So I can learn as much from you probably as you can from me in this. I wanted to highlight maybe a little bit of confirmation that I'm the right person for you to spend an hour with, that we did just get our Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, RISC management, just got an award. So we were just awarded by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. They're one of 3 annual climate adaptation leadership awards. And this is one of the world's only climate adaptation awards for natural resources. And I'm very proud to say that we were awarded this just last week. And so the work we've been doing, I'll tell you about for the last 5 years, is getting some recognition. We're also spreading across the country, which is appropriate for invasive species, I guess, focus. This is what I'll be talking about today, kind of, all right, how climate change is making our invasive species problems worse. What is this translational and ecology thing, and then how we can kind of help you. This is an image from the most recent National Climate Assessment, which I was co-author on. And just an idea of the kinds of climate change we're seeing across the country. And you can see lots of different aspects here. And I'll just hit on a few of those for our region. So we know that temperatures are rising. In fact, in the Northeast, we're seeing more increase in temperature than pretty much anywhere else in the lower 48, especially in winter. We're also seeing changes in precipitation across the country. The New York Times just came out with this awesome view of that, which I should put in my presentation, but so you can check that out. But we, as you probably have experienced, are actually getting wetter in the Northeast, even as the West is getting drier. So there's kind of 2 stories going on in our country. But especially in the winter, we're getting a lot of increases, and we've also seen a lot of increases in the fall in terms of precipitation. And we expect those changes, well, okay, so although we are both getting increases in mean precipitation, we're especially getting increases in these heavy precipitation events, which we've all experienced. Now, if you've lived here for even a couple of years, you've experienced this crazy swings between drought and floods. And I live in Western Massachusetts, in a very agricultural area where those floods are really felt in the farm fields. You can see that here in the ways that we talk about different heavy precipitation events. in terms of, 2-day events or 5-day events. And you can see that the Northeast really stands out in our change. And we just expect this to continue. So here are some projections from Mike Rollins and Ray Bradley, who are based at University of Massachusetts and associated with the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, that we'll see that winters will keep being wetter and we will likely have drier summers, especially down on Long Island. Unfortunately, for a lot of the Northeast, these wetter winters will be wet in terms of rain and not snow. So the kind of wetness that we don't like in the winter. Other changes we're expecting are increasing lengthening of the growing season and decreasing of frost days. This kind of go hand in hand. So this is comparing mid-century to the last 50 years. And again, just continuing the trends of having the growing season lengthening and growing degree days increasing, and the start of those growing degree days coming earlier. And we know that's already happening. So from data from the National Phenology Network, tracing these lilacs over the last century, we can see that there's been a pretty remarkable increase in the growing season over the last century. You can see that in the red, there's areas that have increased by even half a week per decade. We tried to kind of sum up these changes. So you can see that here in this little kind of growing ecological calendar we made. The original, maybe historical normal, whatever that means, but what we thought of as normal in the 20th century is represented in these dark bands. And the pink is where we're going. So if we start where we are now, okay, so let's say we start in sort of July, August, we expected we'd start to move into these low summer, fall flows here and follow that into October. What we're actually experiencing is that we start that into July and that extends into November. You can see that the growing season is expected to increase on both ends and that the snow accumulation time period is really decreasing, as well as getting earlier spring flows. And all of this sums up to really affect our hardiness zones. So here's a look at hardiness zones just between 1990 and 2015. There's the change, and that's pretty remarkable. It's only 25 years. This is something we've already experienced, already lived through. It's hard to kind of see Long Island on here, but I see that it says like it's kind of no change or maybe a +1 there. And you can kind of see that. And so maybe there's a lot of buffering from the coastal perspective. We can see as we zoom in, you can see that a little bit better. You can't see the 1990, but you can see here those increases in it. And this Climate Voyager tool, which was a product of the Southeast task, is a nice opportunity to look at projections for the future. And so this is looking at the kind of recent current of where you're at right now versus what is expected into the future. And this is looking at the future showing the shift in the zones and where we think this is kind of headed, which is a decent change in terms of zone. So we've got thinking about the shift from being in sort of a, let's see, I've got one more here. There we go. So thinking about the zone that I'm sitting in, moving from kind of this like 6A to eventually moving into kind of a 7A. And you know, that can mean a lot to people that think about gardening. Okay, so that's climate change. I want to bring in the interaction between climate change and invasive species. And we can see just from this little pictogram, which is part of work we've done at the Northeast RISC. I'll be showing throughout the presentation some of the management challenges we put together, these one-pagers with these images and digested information that are hopefully helpful to you and your partners. So you can see that we talked about the longer growing season. So we've got invasives that are able to emerge earlier and stay longer due to extended growing seasons. Invasive species, almost by definition, are more adaptable, more opportunistic than other species and than most of our native species. And so they're able to be flexible, or indeed were already adapted to come out earlier, so they can take advantage of these changes. We also have climate extremes. I didn't talk about that too much, but we know that we're having these big storms and more stronger hurricanes and flooding events that create new opportunities for invasion as they create disturbance. We have invasives shifting their ranges from south to north on our side of the country, and I'll show that in a minute. We have new pathways coming in as sea ice melts along the Atlantic coast. We have new invasives that can come in from places they never were able to access before. Research has shown that invasives are becoming some invasives are becoming more competitive and with warming and higher atmospheric CO2, as well as some natives like poison ivy, unfortunately. And then also there's information that some of our herbicides are less effective with higher atmospheric CO2. So lots of challenges. On top of that, the Northeast is a hotspot for future plant invasion. One of the reasons is that the Southeast is currently a hotspot for plants and invasives. It's sort of very similar to the habitat and the climate niche, where a lot of our invasives come over from tropical areas or warm, wet areas in Asia, for example. Well, that climate is moving into the Northeast. It's moving into Long Island, it's moving up into Massachusetts. And so we're a hotspot sort of for those invasives to move as well. Okay, so, oh, and here's an example of that. So we've got kudzu moving in. This has been like the scourge of the South. And for a long time, they had to worry about it. And now more and more we do. It's just as an example. What I want to talk about today is some of the tools that we can use to actually address some of these things. Similarly, other pests. So I'm talking a lot about invasive plants, but we also know that other challenges for our forests and our other habitats, like forest pests, are something to consider. So we've got things like emerald ash borer roaring out and southern pine beetle. And so southern pine beetle is an example, of course, for the native expanding. So it doesn't exactly go in this category, but also, of course, and on Long Island, some places in Massachusetts, it's a big concern and something that we can maybe sort of treat with similar tools. So this is a projection that was done out of some colleagues of mine at the University of Vermont in Columbia, looking at where we expect southern pine beetle to get into in terms of as temperatures warm and those thresholds are crossed. So we can think about other of our pest concerns as well, and try to project when we expect to see these changes as well. All right, so there was a lot of like scary information, and what I'm here to talk about as well is sort of a paradigm that we would like to encourage, and in fact you are likely already like immersed in, which we call translational invasion ecology. Translational invasion ecology is an approach that embodies an intentional and inclusive process in which researchers, stakeholders, and decision makers collaborate to develop and implement research via joint consideration of the sociological, ecological, economic, and political context of the problem of invasive species. Basically, there are two spheres. There's research and practice. And research in the universities and USGS and science agencies are working in basic science and theory, and sometimes even applied science. They're producing data and journal articles and models and predictions. And then on the other side, we have practitioners at land management agencies, at NGOs that are working in this adaptive management framing and advocacy and policy, that are often turning to web-based portals or mapping tools or reports and produce reports and expert opinion, and really need to be working in the space of conservation planning and decision support. And if we can bring those together in this vein of translational ecology, built on a platform of collaboration and trust, then ultimately we can produce actionable science and better decision-making. Sort of the idea of translational invasion ecology and translational ecology in general is to rely on these principles and goals of translational ecology. So collaboration, engagement, commitment, good communication, good process, and always coming back to that decision framing context. So those are the ideas that we're kind of working within at RISC, and you may be as well in the ISMAs, and thinking about working in this space of working together and using these principles. So we just had this paper published about a month ago on this idea, and I just want to spend one more slide on talking about translational invasion ecology and this kind of step-by-step process. And so the idea being, you can either identify a problem or identify stakeholders that you want to work with on a problem. And so it may be, and at RISC, we identified that we think invasive species and climate change is an issue that together we need to be tackling. And it was something that a lot of our natural resource managers had talked to us about. And we kind of realized there's a lot of attention and time and energy going into invasive species, but maybe not in a climate smart way. So we've got the identified stakeholders and then kind of narrowing in on the problem. And you'll see as I go through, there are different research programs, projects we've actually developed from beginning to end based on working with our stakeholders. So we then meet and discuss the needs and identify solutions. And there's a step in which researchers go off and do research, synthesize, and conduct. And the practitioners, the managers are implementing strategies. But there's a lot of iteration around this. And eventually the goals of producing outputs and outcomes and having impacts are going to slightly differ between the partners at the table, where the professors and research scientists need to maybe produce peer-reviewed articles, and the managers need best management practices. And then we can have a place here for boundary spanners, where they can come together, bring both sides to the table, and make sure everyone is kind of interacting and communicating well, good process, decision-making context that we talked about. Of course, come back and iterate. So this is the process we use at RISC. RISC was founded 5 years ago. We were the Northeast RISC alone, and now we've expanded. There are new RISCs in the Pacific Islands, the Northwest, the North Central, and hopefully soon the Southeastern US as well. We work together to reduce the compounding effects of invasive species and climate change by synthesizing relevant science, communicating needs of managers to researchers, building stronger scientist management communities, and conducting priority research. So we have a community of over 500 practitioners, educators, researchers. If you're not on our listserv yet, hopefully you will be by the end of the day. We spread a lot of good information. I hope you'll see. And that's because about 15 of us meet for 90 minutes every week, and have for the last 4 years or so. So we put a lot of time on this. So most of the people in this picture are either have their PhD or are working toward their PhD. And then we have managers at the table as well who have PhDs. So we have a lot of like thoughtful, super smart, dedicated people working on these problems to try to produce things that are useful and can lead to actionable science. we recently put together kind of a 5-year look back for those other risks that were starting up. And this is this little document. So we talk about kind of who we are and what we did. These are the things we generally do. We act as boundary spanners. We do original research, as I'll tell you a little bit about. We do a lot of research translation and synthesis, and then some communication and implementation. So we give talks like I am doing today. And then we have a kind of a timeline of how we got here. Here's an example of a year for us that I guess is typical, although also great. And we're just kind of expanding each year. So here's the things we accomplished just last year and the work we did together. And so we're really working to produce these documents that are helpful and digest information that we think is helpful for invasive research species managers. So I'll tell you about some of those documents. We did conduct a survey 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where we asked our stakeholders and some, including some across the country, what is it that you would like to know? And other questions like, what gets in the way of you considering climate change in your invasive species management? And what are the sources of information you use? And so here's just that answer to the sources of information. And most people said they rely on one-on-one conversation with experts and colleagues. So it's really interesting, like these report backs about Tree of Heaven, about spotted lanternfly. These are like, I think these one-on-one conversations, although maybe that goes on their meetings as well. But you can see that here also listed as important were meetings or symposia, management documents and technical reports, and websites. So we really took on those three to say, all right, let's do this and do it well. So one of the things is we have a meeting every year, a symposium. It's usually in Massachusetts, not very far from you. And last year's was virtual. We'll see what happens next year. It's likely to be virtual. So it'd be great to have you there. We have, we've been doing it for 5 years. We have managers and researchers present. We also have lots of workshops, lots of time for interaction, lots of sharing back together and struggling over current issues. And it's all Northeastern managers. So there's a lot of like sharing information. And I would say, actually from your Long Island perspective, I saw in the chat, there's like, we have kudzu, we actually have kudzu in Massachusetts as well, although it's not yet really spreading. Your Long Island perspective can be very helpful for those that are coming from Maine, as you are going to be hit first for things in Northern New England. And likewise, we do a lot of connecting up with Southern managers to tell us what's coming up and how to deal with it. Because as you'll see, we've started to project what species you can expect to see soon. There's one thing to have a list of those species. There's another thing to know what to do about them, right? Like what herbicide, or when are you doing the surveys, and when should you cut and pull, and all of the things. So we try to have webinars where we bring the managers together from like Southern and Northern to kind of share information. So it's another thing we do in terms of information sharing. One of our products that I mentioned is our research summaries. So these are digests of journal articles that we think are particularly relevant for our management colleagues. And we actually do a separate abstract summary digest for our community of 500 to 600 riskers. So this is something with your kind of framing in mind, not just the author's abstract. And these are looked over. We have somebody who does it, and then we have a peer reviewer. So each one of these is several hours of work for us. And we send one every week, I believe it is. On the left, that's an example of one of the articles we reviewed. On the right, we've actually started doing some tools as well. So if there's some tool that you're interested in getting reviewed, we can do that and share it, or you really like, we can review it and share it with our community. What we spend a lot of time on is our management challenges. So these are, as I mentioned, these are one-pagers, so double-sided documents where we cram in like 50 journal articles of information into very little text. And we usually have about 10 to 15 authors on these. So they take us something like 100 hours of time, again, from mostly people that have like PhDs or are graduate students, and we're spending like lots and lots and lots of time to get this down, to digest that you have time to read. So really just saying like, what is the most useful information to digest a topic? And for example, we have this sleeper species document. So this is a topic that we've been thinking more about. These are naturalized species. So you have lots of non-natives in your backyard and in your management units on Long Island that you don't think much about because you don't have to, because they're fine, they're not a problem. So we are in the process of doing a research project to make sure that's true, to go through and think about the ones that actually might end up being a problem as temperatures warm, as precipitation changes, as disturbance regimes increase, or as disturbances increase. Because for example, like kudzu is essentially naturalized in New England right now, or in most of it. So that could be a species, if we never talked to anyone that lives south of us, we could say, oh, that's no problem. But we know it is going to be a problem. And so those are the kind of species we want to be able to look out for, because as we know, early detection, rapid response is the key to a lot of this. We have other management challenges, why native, just encouraging planting native. I just particularly like this graphic. And then we had one that was a little bit out of the box for us on gardening with climate smart natives. And you can see we did that plant hardiness zone in there, and I have a lot of information packed into this one. See if I have the back of it on here. I do. And we had a lot of downloads of it. So people loved it. We got it out just in time to bring it into all of the garden centers last year, March of last year, and then COVID hit. So we have done a lot more of this over via PDF and less in person than we expected, but this is might be something that would be of interest to you and your partners. Another management challenge I wanted to highlight was this taking action. So we had a workshop at one of our symposia where we got managers together to say, what are some climate smart management options? Like, what are you doing for the people that are trying to adjust their management? What does that look like? And then we took that, we digested information, made it into a management challenge. So in terms of strategic planning, here's what people are doing. In terms of preventative management, here's what people are doing. And these can all be accessed on our website, riscnetwork.org, under resources. This is because I guess I knew I would forget to say that we have partnered with the National Park Service on the sleeper species project. One other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of research is the species distribution shift work that Jenica Allen and Bethany Bradley are doing. So giant reed or Rhododendron is a concern for a lot of managers in our region, I know. And here's its current distribution. This is EdMaps. We have a lot of information posted onto EdMaps. So it's a great place to put in your observations. I know different states and different ISMOs have different processes, but here's one that seems to work well. So working within this platform, Jenica Allen produced a range shift listing tool. So you can find that here, where you can select your state and put in the information that you're looking for and get a list of species that we expect to range expand with climate change. And you can see that you can choose the number of models to see kind of what your level of certainty is for that. Okay, so here's an example of that, like download of the species. So to come back to Rhododendron, and there's Jenica Allen, we can see that we're expecting that the species will expand into Long Island even though we have observations from other places. And I'm just seeing, okay, I know there's a lot of chatter, so I'll look at that later. This is actually a pullback from the earlier slide I showed, just saying, yeah, so we expect these changes to happen because we have this hotspot kind of moving in. These are projected of changes. And so we can produce these for state or county. And here I wanted to show you, this is around the Donax again. And I just wanted to show you with the number of models. So here's the number of models set to 1 and the expansion that's expected. So like the very low bar in terms of your dealing with uncertainty in terms of whether it's spreading. And then if we like make the bar to 13 models have to agree on this, you can see actually that it's still expecting to spread into Long Island, onto Long Island, even with those 13 models. So you can see that this is a species that we'd likely want to talk to the Southeast about how to handle that. And we have talked about having a webinar about Rhododendron. I don't think we did yet. I know we had one about, I think it was hogweed. But that's all available on our website. And if that's of interest, let us know. There's another species. So this is 3 models, and you can see that it's expecting. This is actually not seen very frequently across the country, except for out west. But this is a species that has the climate niche would allow it to expand all into the Northeast, except the very top of northern New England. It just has to get there, but you can see there are already some places that might be so. And then likewise, water primrose. So those are some things that kind of can keep us up at night, I guess, thinking about how species are shifting around. I just wanted to take a minute to make sure that I pointed out that we have lots of information on our website. So we've got, under the resources page, you'll find the management challenges, the research summaries. Under events, you'll see recordings from the last 5 years of our symposia. We have all of the speakers' talks recorded. So there's just like lots of information on our website. And you can find out how to join the listserv there. So I think I'll leave it there because there's so much in questions in our conversation in the chat. I'd be happy to address.
Thank you, Toni Lyn. That was great. Very interesting. I had not heard of translational invasion ecology before, and it's a very cool idea. I'm glad you're doing it. I also love the predictive maps to give folks a heads up of what's coming, like Giant Reed. And so we'll check that out more and keep a lookout for these. There was a question about novel ecosystems, a subject near and dear to my heart on Long Island, because we have a lot of them. Is that research going on, or are you involved in that at all?
Yeah, so good. I just participated in 2 days of the Northwest RISCC Symposium, and that all got recorded. And one of the framings they used for their symposium was the RAD framework, which if any of you are familiar with, this is what the direction the National Park Service is going in. So RAD is resist, accept, direct. And the idea being that we're gonna have to do a lot more of thinking about novel ecosystems, which fall somewhat in accept and I guess a lot in direct, or at least to say novel for, sometimes it's kind of novel for where you are. I've done a lot of thinking about novel ecosystems, partly just because of who I've been around. Some of my colleagues are some of the people that have written a lot about it. One of the takeaways for me is that when you look at the paleo ecological record, there's almost no such thing as community unless you just like take a slice in time. So we are a slice in time, of course, of the long history of the earth. And so we think communities are static because we've known them to be for 100 or a couple hundred years, but you just got to find a tree ringer to know that that's not true, right? So I think that thinking about novel ecosystems will be really important, and it gets us to, and part of my job, I'm a decision scientist, and it gets us to think about what are our objectives. And I think that there's nobody that understands that better than people that are invasive species managers, because you all know better than any of us the futility of trying to fix everything everywhere. I think I try to keep the Oriental bittersweet out of my 1 acre yard, and that's enough of a challenge. So I know, like, trying to, you know, keep invasives out of a whole Long Island is something that, well, is like prohibitively ambitious. So we know that we have to, in some level, triage. And what that means is that you pick places. I work on climate refugia, you know, maybe you pick places that are special, or refugia, or some other reason why you're going to be fighting the invasives, but there's other places that you're going to have to figure out how to work with them. And I know things like Phragmites and some species that actually have some function become part of the conversation. And so I think in the novel ecosystems concept, we say, brings me to think, okay, what are our objectives? And if our objectives are ecosystem function, or ecosystem services, ecological function or ecosystem services, then we can help put invasives into a place where we decide what are the ones that we really need to tackle because they're just gonna devastate everything, versus, and I don't know, maybe here, and we might be talking out of turn, but maybe here, like water chestnut is something that we think of like the species that have such a negative impact that we really just want to keep fighting it. And then other ones, I know, like purple loosestrife around here, people have kind of said, meh, maybe we just let it go. So thinking about things that are actually disruptive to the services or function, or really fundamentally to the diversity of the ecosystem, or huge economic impacts. Because yeah, on some level, novel ecosystems are our future, because in reality, throughout Earth's history, novel ecosystems have always been the future. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were looking for in an answer.
That's a great answer.
Thank
you know, we're not managing novel ecosystems. They just sort of hang out on their own, but there's impacts on flora and fauna, native flora and fauna. And I think at some point they need to be managed based on whatever our goals and objectives are. So that was a fantastic answer, actually, Toni Lyn. And pretty much everything you've presented today is new to most of us, if not all of us. So I greatly appreciate it. Are there any other questions in here in the chat? But speaking of novel ecosystems, while we're waiting for people to put something in the chat, we have our biannual conference coming up in March, and we'd like to have a presentation on novel ecosystems. It's something we want to talk more about. So I'll just put that out there. If anyone wants to present or knows of someone that could present. All right. I don't see any other questions. There was some chatter about, does anyone see anything? There was some talk about spotted lanternfly, but does anyone else have any questions for Toni Lyn? All right, and I see links in here for more information about the network. And yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. All new stuff for us to think about.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that people hadn't heard of the RISCs yet. So that's really exciting. Abby actually comes to you from us, from the RISC. So it's great. So you have a local expert in your midst, so she can answer your questions after I've gotten off the line. But yes, please sign up. We won't bother, like, we won't inundate you with information from the listserv. It's really like those research summaries, which people say they love. It's occasionally like, we put out a new management challenge, and then our annual symposium. And so we really try to keep it relevant. And then, yeah, I think also just the connections with other other prisms, other SISMAs, other regional invasive species managers were really like do a lot with state agencies to try to bring them together, which is something I think we do well in the Northeast, is bringing states together, and yet we could still do better. And I will be remiss if I don't mention that I'm a co-founder of Northeast RISCC with Carrie Brown-Lima, who's the director of the New York Invasive Species Research Institute at Cornell, which you are probably well familiar with, NISRI. So we're very connected to New York, and as was said in my bio, I hail from Long Island, so it's good to have a little Long Island connection here. But yeah, please let us know how we can help, because that's what we're there to do.
Thank you very much. The last chat message is, that was excellent. Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it on that positive note.